Dr. John Ridley and his lovely wife Peggy. John is a native of Grange, Georgia, a graduate of Georgia Tech, where he played on the golf team, Emory University School of Medicine, and trained at Johns Hopkins. He practiced obstetrics and gynecology at Piedmont Hospital for years and is head of the department and chairman of the board of trustees. His wife Peggy is a native of Baltimore and met somewhere up east, and she was a cover girl for Life magazine. And she could still be a cover girl for Life magazine, as you can see, during World War II, and she'll tell us about that a little later. But in the meanwhile, we're going to start with John and let him tell us about his growing up and how he got into the military and what happened to him after he got there. Go ahead, John.
Mason, I'll be glad to. I grew up in LaGrange, as he said. I finished elementary school there and then went to Georgia Tech and took my pre-medical education, which I'm proud of, at Georgia Tech in the chemical engineering department. It was a thorough pre-medical education, and since that time I've been on the advisory committee for pre-medical education at Georgia Tech, which I'm proud of. So when I finished Georgia Tech, I got a commission as an ensign in the U.S. Navy Reserve, just as a standby. This was in 1935. I put that on the back shelf, you might say. I thought nothing else of it until the summer of 1941, when the war was imminent, and we knew that we were probably in some trouble at the time. I had not had any active Navy duty. However, I got orders to report to active duty in October of 41 as a line officer. I wanted to be a doctor rather than a line officer in the Navy, and they had ordered me aboard a destroyer that was at the time moored at Charleston, South Carolina. I went to Washington immediately to try to transfer to the Medical Corps, which was a little more difficult than I expected, because the old captain that interviewed me there said, "You go on and get the hell down to Charleston, because doctors are a dime a dozen, and we need you on the ship as we trained you." I was flabbergasted and asked him, I said, "Now who can I see now?" He said, "I'm it." He said, "I'm the last word." Well, I was still a civilian, brash. I walked out in the hall and walked down this hall at the Department of Navy of Navigation at the time, and walked into the office, the outer office of Admiral Nimitz, which you don't do as a rule. As I walked into the reception room, the lieutenant commander there said, "What do you want, Doc?" I said, "I'd like to get changed to the Medical Corps, because being a doctor, I can be of more service as a doctor rather than a line officer." He said, "Give me that thing." So he took a red pencil and marked through it. He said, "Okay," he said, "you'll be in the Medical Corps by the time you get back to Baltimore." I was in Washington at the time. And so that suited me fine. I went then to, as I was leaving, this fellow told me, he said, "Look," doctor said, "you don't walk into the Department of Navigation and say you want to see Admiral Nimitz. You got to have an appointment. However, goodbye." And that was it. I went on back to Baltimore and didn't get too settled at the time, because I knew that war was imminent. And on December the 7th, I got orders to report to this old four-piper relic destroyer that was built in 1918 and gotten out of mothballs to try to do something in the North Atlantic. It was a terrible experience, but however, being at that age, it meant no difference really, because you didn't think about tomorrow. You just thought about doing that today. We spent 2 winters in the North Atlantic around Iceland on the Murmansk run. And the worst part of it, I think, came in October 42, at which time our convoy of 48 ships had a Wolfpack encounter and we lost 18 of these tankers. They were all carrying aviation gasoline to Russia. And we lost 18, which blew the convoy apart. At the time, however, there was an explosion on the ship, and I was pretty badly injured because at the time I got knocked out. I couldn't see or hear. And when I got back to Reykjavik, Iceland, I was admitted to the hospital, and they looked me over a bit, got me sort of straightened out. And then I went back to active duty for the rest of my stay on the destroyer. I might say, incidentally, that they recommended I get Purple Heart for that. I didn't pursue that because I didn't think that my injury really warranted a Purple Heart. Well, from the destroyer, I was ordered to Pensacola, Florida, to take training as a flight surgeon. I arrived in Pensacola, I believe, in February of '43, and started training. I got my wings about 3 months later and got orders immediately to the West Coast to join one of the greatest ships that ever sailed, and that was the USS Enterprise. And I was very proud of that and look forward to being on it. I might say, incidentally, that a lucky break came when I was at Pensacola, because I had met Peggy on a brief shore leave in summer '42, and we were married in Pensacola at the chapel there. So Peggy and I went to West Coast. I took some basic orientation training there at San Diego, and then we were ordered immediately to Seattle, Bremerton, where I joined the USS Enterprise. I flew off the Enterprise as not only as a passenger, but also on several flights as a tail gunner, and which I volunteered for, and I must say it was quite an experience because I enjoyed it. And I made 5 combat flights and other patrols, and for that I was awarded the Air Medal. But anyhow, that was an experience, and a lot of little peculiar things and funny things that happened in a career like that really you probably don't want me to go into all those details, but some of them were ridiculous, really.
I think we ought to hear every one of them.
Well, I think one of the worst experiences I had in the whole war was we were dive-bomb proxying, and on the island of Kahalawi, which is near Maui, and we flipped a coin to see which of 3 of us would go as an observer or as a tail gunner in the other 2 dive bombers. Well, I lost, and I was the observer. So we went up to 12,000 feet, and these other 2 boys, 2 men to the plane, dove for this target, collided halfway down, and both planes were destroyed. I had to go to that island by a Piper Cub to reclaim the bodies and to bring them back for burial. And that was the worst experience I think I had. From there, we went on to extensive duties in the Pacific, the Western Pacific. The Enterprise was in the middle of all of it. We shot down Jap planes. We launched against overwhelming forces at times, I thought. And I was very proud of the fact that I could be a part of the Navy Air Corps at the time. I might say one other thing had a little humorous side to it. I went as a tail gunner in a torpedo bomber. They have twin 30 caliber guns that shoot out the back as a stinger operation, they call it. So I was one of 3 crew members, the pilot, the turret gunner above, and me. We went to Hollandia, strafed, dropped 100-pound bombs where we should, and started back. But the ridiculous part about it, Mason, was in repositioning myself after I'd done this little duty of mine, strafing and all, I accidentally pulled the ripcord on my parachute. The bomb bay was closing, but the wind was still a lot of air turbulence. And the parachute billowed and filled the cockpit. And there wasn't much room for me and this huge bunch of silk. I thought I was going to smother, but I didn't. We got back to the Enterprise, landed. Bill Martin, who was the captain and the pilot, kept calling me. I couldn't get to my intercom. So he told the turret gunner, his name was Swanson. He said, Swanson said, "Can you see Ridley down there?" And he said, "No, sir, I can't." He said, "Well, I guess they got him." He said, "He's a pretty nice fellow," so it was too bad. So we landed. And they said, "Where is he?" So they opened the door for me to get out of this little compartment where I was located. And they had to pull me out with all this silk and all. They laughed. I never lived it down. They called me the silkworm. But that was one of the humorous experiences. But however, I think to bring it sort of to an end, I might say that this was a marvelous experience. I'm proud to have gone through it. I don't think there's a day that a war veteran lives that in some way he doesn't connect a little bit with the past of what he's been through. And this is true now because I think it fashions your life. So I think the déjà vu that you may have of war experiences live with you forever. We try to suppress this, of course, because a lot of people aren't interested in it too much. But I think that it's something that you live with, and you would be willing to do it again if you had to. David, I think I probably talked a little bit too much, but nevertheless...
John, you just getting started. Peggy?
Yes.
How did you get on the front of Life magazine? Tell us how that occurred.
Oh, I was working in New York in commercial photography, doing ads. And they wanted to show, I guess, the country that women, girls were all involved in this because they had all these programs. They had the gray ladies and the pink ladies who helped at the hospitals. And they had whole groups of women in New York who used to make sweaters and scarves and things to ship overseas. So they asked me to get out my sewing, and they were going to make a picture for Life magazine, to go around the country, and showed a lot of these girls doing what they were doing, which they were doing all over the country as well as New York. And it was just to encourage that sort of thing. But I feel like John's left out some other interesting things about his life, particularly when he went overboard and fell off the skank in the North Atlantic. You don't live very long when you do that.
Well, that's why you're here, to keep him honest, so he can't get away without telling us these stories.
Well, anyway, he said, I'm here, and they got him. Fortunately, the ship hadn't moved out yet. They were able to get him back on board. And that was another time when the Purple Heart came up, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. I mean, I wasn't injured, except I think that it was a frightening aftermath there.
John, how did you go overboard?
What happened was that I had come back from going ashore in Reykjavik, freezing, ice everywhere, and as I was getting up on the gangway, the little gangway on the destroyer, covered with ice, I slipped and fell in the water and I had on a heavy coat and sank immediately, and I could not get back up. But anyhow, I felt this rope that went past my face, and I grabbed it, and that saved my life because they knew that I had grabbed this thing. They pulled me up, and when I got back up there, they stripped me of the freezing clothes and put me in a cold shower and all that, which felt hot. But anyhow, it was one of those close calls which you get at times, and you quickly forget about it, and thank God it didn't turn out the other way.
How long could someone live in those waters if they weren't rescued?
How long what?
How long could someone stay alive in the ice waters of where you were at that time?
That's an interesting thing because they said death usually would occur within 10 to 12 minutes with complete submersion. And of course, I had some insulation there with the clothing I had on, and I guess I was in the water a total of 5-6 minutes or something like that. But anyhow, we would lose. We couldn't pick up survivors. This was a heartbreak in the North Atlantic because we couldn't pick up survivors because not only of the weather, but also the danger of slowing the destroyer down and getting torpedoed at the time. And we had to pass up a lot of these fellows that I think might have been saved, but we couldn't stop. So I think that you can say that if you get in and out of that water within 8 minutes, 10 minutes at the most, you might survive.
That would have scared the bejeelies out of me. I'm glad you survived. Did it scare you when you heard about it, Peggy?
Oh, Lord, yes. I thought he'd come home a zombie.
Well, they reported the ship was lost 2 or 3 times. I mean, I think Peggy got sort of used to that because...
Well, they said it was gone.
Yeah, they said the ship was gone. And of course, they reported the Enterprise was sunk 3 or 4 times. People got used to Tokyo Rose or whatever the name was. And but anyhow, that was part of their
Wow.
Peggy, describe some of the feelings you had when you were worried about John. Do you mind doing that?
Well, it's kind of hard to describe, really. You think every day something's going to happen. And it does to so many people that you just try not to think about it. I think I worked harder then than I've ever worked in my life, just keeping really busy. Because several of my friends lost their husbands, and poor Karen Sibley, Jimmy was taken prisoner at the very beginning, the first time he went out. She didn't know where he was, whether he was dead or alive, and she, in the meantime, had a baby. So I could concentrate on other things, other people's problems, but it was I'd wake up at night and think, something's happened. You know, you get a funny feeling. But fortunately, nothing did. But I think John was so anxious to get off of the destroyer. And then when he finally did, you didn't tell him that story, which I think is wonderful. You know, when he was aboard the Skank, he did all kinds of surgery. Didn't the captain have appendicitis?
Yes, I mean, that's one of the things that the medical officer on the destroyer was a jack of all trades. Not only was he a doctor, but he was a preacher, he was a storekeeper, and he was a watch officer in emergencies. And I remember the captain, he was one of the poorest captains I've ever served under. And he's gone now. Anyhow, I won't call his name. But anyhow, he was so tense that he couldn't relax and inspire the crew at all. And he gave me hell. And then all of a sudden he called me one morning. He said, "Doc, I got a terrible bellyache." He had typical acute appendicitis. We were 4 days away from St. John's, Newfoundland, heavy weather. And I said, "Captain," I said, "you've got to be operated on." I said, I haven't got enough antibiotics or anything like that. I said, you got a bad situation. He said, you think I'll make it? It will go in as fast as we can. I said, we'll try. So we made it in a day and a half, going as fast as that old destroyer would go, which was a rough trip. I operated on him at St. John's Army Hospital because they didn't have a Navy facility there. But one of the things that was funny, I thought, I took him to the hospital there, and on admitting him, the watch officer sitting there said, Doc, what do you want? I said, I've got to operate on this man. I'll have him operate on him. I said, who's your chief surgeon? He said, we don't have any surgeons on call. He said, I'm an ophthalmologist. I said, have you ever done an appendectomy? He said, oh, no. He said, that's for you to do. So anyhow, I did it with a spinal anesthesia. But anyhow, that man, when he told me he was an ophthalmologist rather than a surgeon, I said, oh, God, this is typical. But anyhow, those kind of things, those are the things that made, I think, military life interesting. And
one of your colleagues, Charlie Stone, told me one time that he did an appendectomy on a landing craft going into southern France. And you have a choice of rebutting that story as being untruthful, exaggerated, or totally true.
Totally true if Charlie told me.
It's typical. It really is typical. You know, those kind of things, if you can't do it, you have to make do. That's all there is to it. This captain told me, he said, Doc said, we've got to have some religious service aboard this ship. I said, what do you mean? He said, I'm a Baptist. I believe in Sunday worship. He said, we're going to be in Iceland, Reykjavik Harbor, Sunday. He said, I want you to preach a sermon. I said, I haven't preached a sermon. He said, well, you better find that one. I said, I want you to preach a sermon. So we got on this freezing cold, windy deck, and the poor kids were all around the side there. And he made them get out there. And I figured, I said, look, I got to do something, so I rushed around. Now, one old fellow there was pretty much a religious person himself. He said, Doc, he said, preach about the 23rd Psalm and the 91st Psalm. So I did. I used that as a theme of my sermon and got by with it. But anyhow, that's just typical of the things which would happen, which would lighten the mood and the tension that happens. Some things are unforgettable, and some things are forgettable.
Did you, or am I wrong, did you transfer from one ship to another?
Well, that's true. That was another harrowing experience, which was interesting. We had...
I thought it was fascinating.
One of our convoy ships, an old cargo ship from England, was plowing along, and they blinked us and said they had an explosion aboard their ship. They had a badly injured person. Because they have a doctor aboard. They didn't have. So the sea was calm enough at the time that they transferred me by British buoy over to the English ship. And I took some sulfanilamide, which we had, and some morphine syrets, and went over and found out that this fellow was badly burned, but not fatally so. And we were able to make him comfortable and get him bandaged up. But the weather worsened a little bit while I was there, and I couldn't get back for 24 hours. But they had good food aboard this ship, and also allowed whiskey, alcoholic beverages on the English ships. So by the time I got back to the destroyer, I not only was well fed, but I was pretty well hungover. I didn't care either. But anyhow, that's just another one of those experiences.
I can understand you enjoying their whiskey, but I didn't think British food was supposed to be that sought after by Americans.
That's true. That's true. Well, anyhow, it is.
Well, what getting back was, didn't you have to go on a rope?
Oh yeah, a British buoy, as they call it. A British buoy. They shoot a line over to the ship, and then you transfer it over probably
In
100,
a
200,
bucket or something?
200 feet on a pulley. And with a life jacket on and everything, hoping to God you don't fall in.
And you'd already been in
You knew how cold it was. Were you scared?
to death.
Oh, I think you're apprehensive, but you know, at that age you're not. You kind of figure, well, this it's not going to happen to me. You know, I mean, so you go ahead. I didn't have a choice. I wouldn't have refused anyhow. So,
John, I've talked to people who were in combat on the ground, and they say they only knew what was happening in their immediate vicinity. You were on a ship and you were in an airplane at various and sundry times during the war. Did you have a global perspective of what was going on in the war at the time you were in the military, or were you more confined to your own immediate combat area?
well, actually, I knew that there was no foreseeable end of the war when we were in the Atlantic, and the same thing is true when we were in the Pacific against the Japanese. I couldn't see that there was much of a chance of me ever getting back to any normal life, which you accept. It's one of the things which you accept in your military career. And as it turned out, we were lucky enough to get by with it.
Did you go over thinking that you may not ever come back?
Did what?
Did you go over thinking you may never come back?
Oh, yeah. Sure.
And Peggy, you accepted the fact that he may never come back when you told him goodbye?
No, I really didn't.
So you were the eternal optimist that he would come back
Oh, yeah.
the whole time.
What I was seeing and hearing wasn't all this detailed, or I wouldn't have felt that way, probably. But everybody had that feeling that everybody was coming home.
I think that's true. I think that.
They were well taken care of. And, you know, you're reading about the war in the paper. It wasn't like it would have been now, because now you're practically in the war yourself, sitting there by your TV. But in those days, we were going by what we were hearing, and we felt everybody was going to be just fine. That, in a way, you want to feel that way. In a way, that's the way they made you feel. We're going to win this, and everybody's going to be safe.
What other stories has John not told us that you think he ought to tell us?
Gosh, there's so many.
Well, let's go
If I could-
wind him up and put a nickel in his ear.
You know, anybody, I mean, they say that do you have any regrets about any of the service that you had in the war? And I had none. I mean, because actually you were not only trying to save lives, but you were trying to save your own life. And I've been asked about, did you feel bad about strafing people? No, not at all. Because they were trying to kill us, you see.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know, that is not usually accepted, I think, as a general feeling, but I think you ask most of the people who've been in combat that they don't mind shooting that man before he shoots me. And I think that is sort of what went through my mind when I was asked about these kind of things.
I think the good and the bad in World War II is pretty well defined. The last global conflict that we've had to where everybody was on the good side of the bad side, it appears, so it was probably a little easier then than it is now for some of the people that we send overseas.
Yeah.
What do you all feel singularly and collectively that you would like to tell future generations about the molding experience that World War II had on your lives, and what you think our country ought to be doing now? I think your perspective is very important to future generations.
You know, I have, and I'm not sure it's right, because you've got to class me as a hawk. Although I hate the idea of war, I don't believe in dodging it. It worries me to see some of these youngsters that hide behind anything they can hide to get out of their military obligations. Because after you've been through it, you realize what was at stake and what chances you were taking and for what. And so I think that the main thing that you learn in an experience like this is patriotism, appreciation of your position, appreciation of your country and all. That sounds like I'm on a soapbox, but that's the kind of a thing that has got to go through your mind at times if you're going to have the American spirit.
Peggy, what do you feel?
Well, I just feel that war has never settled or solved anything. And I've got a bunch of grandsons in college, and this situation at the present bothers me terribly, because they would be drafted. They've never been trained to do anything like this. And I think those that avoid it are those that haven't been trained. They just get, you go, that's all. And it's so frightening, unbelievable what's happening now, but I can understand, but it seems like they're all willing to go and all ready to go and just waiting to go. But I myself just know that war proves nothing and we shouldn't fight. I'm not against Bush and what he did at all, because we're dealing with, John and I have been in those countries. John in Afghanistan. I felt like I was stepping out into seeing Mary and Jesus walking down the road. It was the most primitive world you can imagine. And to be over there now, getting shot every time and there's nothing to hide behind. There's just desert and mountain, but no foliage of any kind. I thought Afghanistan, in peace and quiet, was the scariest place I've ever been in my life. And the Afghan men despise women, no matter if it's their own wives. And cruel, the things that I saw that happened to women, as John told me, don't go home and tell these stories because people don't want to hear it. They don't approve.
Well, I know this is an entirely different subject from the war era now like that. I didn't want to get too far afield in some of the other things that we've been into. But anyhow, I didn't want to interrupt Peggy because that's quite a story in itself. But it's a little bit away from what I think your primary interest.
Right, I'm
Well,
sorry.
My primary interest and everybody's interest is how the war molded you all and how you evolved together as a couple for 62 years now, if I did my arithmetic properly. And you have diverse opinions somewhat about the world situation right now. But somehow or another you managed to be happy with each other for 62 years.
For 62 years, yeah.
I think that's wonderful.
Well, I think so too, really. I think that I feel that there's a mutual understanding and respect, which you've got to have, and unselfishness. And the old saying is a 50-50 proposition of effort. Sometimes I think it's a little tilted one way or the other, but nevertheless, I think that you give and take as much as you can evenly.
John, y'all have traveled all over the world, I know, and then you've had your experience in World War II. Do you foresee a time in the history of the world where things can be solved by peace means as opposed to war? Peggy would love to see us not have any war.
I don't think war solves anything. I think that, I don't know exactly how to express this, because I think that the countries that we've been in, Vietnam, we were there for a while, in Afghanistan, and I don't think the war there solved anything except probably, I think it made commerce a little easier. But still, I think that this is not something which solves things as people hope it might.
Well, I don't think the Iraqis, unless you kill Saddam Hussein and they know that he is dead, they are so frightened. They are so frightened now, even being told that we're going to take care of him and he's out of the picture and not to worry. These people are terrified. Plus that, they're not educated. The women certainly aren't. And they don't understand. There's just no way they can, except the women that have been sent away. Now, the women in Afghanistan that got out who were nurses or doctors, they wouldn't go back. And they were allowed to come so they could teach medicine in their own countries, but they would not go back home. And you can't deal with, there's no way to deal with this.
There were some wonderful experiences that we had, I think, in that foreign area. I was on the advisory committee for the CARE Medico organization for 10 years and made 8 trips for them. Peggy went on 5 of them with me and helped a great deal. But anyhow, that in itself is another story. I mean, that's another world. It's really the third world, and what the I guess the tragedy of overpopulation, lack of education has resulted in, and you see it very clearly. I don't think we are improving it any.
Well, if we have a nuclear holocaust, we may improve the population problem before it's all over. Where were you all when the bomb was dropped in World War II?
I remember when the atomic bomb was dropped.
Yes, where were you all at that time?
I was here.
At Patuxent River Naval Air Station. I had come back from sea, and I think that's let me tell that little story because I've been out twice, and I got this call on the day before the atomic bomb was dropped in August. I forget the exact date. But anyhow, I went to the Navy Department on orders to get selected for my 3rd trip overseas. They had offered me to be one of the medical officers on either the Kearsarge, which was being built, or the Roosevelt carrier, either carrier. But as they was assigning me, the thing that tickled me so much was everything came to a dead stop. And this lieutenant commander was interviewing me about what assignment he was going to put me on. He said, wait a minute, something's happened. And he said, my God, he said, Japan has been hit by something they call an atomic bomb. And that was the beginning of the end of the war for me right there. But I remember that so specifically. Isn't it amazing how we think about in detail where you were on December 7th, or where you were when you heard that Franklin Roosevelt died, or when you heard your best friend died, and so forth. Details are burned into you that way.
Yeah. Where were you, Peggy? You were here in Atlanta?
We were in Patuxent River Naval Base, just south of Washington. And I remember the Japanese, when they resigned, John Ridley got in his car and just never said goodbye, just waved to me. Now, where is he going? The war's over. He went to Washington and went in and said, I'd like to get out of the Navy, please. Remember that?
I was ready. I want to get back to training.
How many years had you been in at that time? You'd been in 4 years or 5 years?
Yeah, I was in the whole contract. I went on active duty before December 7th and didn't end up until January 46. So I was in it the whole time. And then I went back to Baltimore and finished up my surgical training there.
Do you think the war trained you for your career at Piedmont Hospital, or do you think that was just an...
I think it did. I do. I think that something like that, in all seriousness, I think it makes you feel appreciative of what you've got. And I think it also teaches a person how to get along with other people, particularly if you've got to be somewhat of a caretaker or somewhat of a leader or boss or whatever. And you learn that. I think you learn that in the war.
Taught him always be in charge, no matter what.
Always be the guy.
Always be in charge.
The view's prettier.
And here he comes at the end of the day. Everybody stand at attention.
Was he in charge at home as much as he was at the hospital?
He's in charge even now, when I don't even listen.
She has a saying that she thought I was the proper person for her to select. She knew my last name, but she didn't know my first name was always right.
Well, I don't know two more people in my life or in the history of Atlanta who were always right than John and Peggy Ridley. John, how about putting on your Navy hat there for us, and let's see what it looks like.
Well, I brought that. This was just a relic of my days on the Enterprise. That's when I was flying. That's when I was flying, and this is the cap like we used to wear in aboard deck or ashore.
Peggy, when he puts the hat on at home, do you have to salute him?
Oh, good Lord, yes.
Oh, absolutely,
Well, thank you so very much. Is there anything else either one of you would like to say to future generations?
I want to thank you
Yes.
for your patience and for forgiving me for standing you up last week, but I had a conflict of another doctor's appointment, you understand. But anyhow, I'd be interested to know what the follow-up of this is, because this kind of thing does interest me. And so thank you again, David, and let me know if anything else that I can do.
John, it's our pleasure to have you and Peggy here. Peggy, you have any last words?
I just think it's wonderful what you're doing and getting the word across, because John never talked about the war, and the other night, two of our grandsons were there, and they were looking at guns or something. We're loaded with guns, needless to say. And John started talking about the war, and they wouldn't let him stop. And I don't think you've ever had a conversation about the war with him.
I don't think so. It's a kind of a thing, you know,
They were
you take for granted, and you feel that people don't want to hear too much about the war, what has happened. And just like today, I really sort of enjoy talking about, I think, sort of the reminiscing, sort of the deja vu of these old things. Gives you pleasure, a little satisfaction.
Well, we've had a lot of guys who've been in interesting situations. We had a dinner party one night, and Jimmy and Karen Sibley were there, and quite a few other people, and John and Jimmy said a couple of things about the war, and the next thing we knew, Jimmy Sibley had never mentioned all that time he was in prison. He was shot down and was taken. Where was he? It was over France, wasn't he?
Yeah, over Germany.
Germany. Anyway, he weighed something like 80 pounds when he got out of jail. Karen didn't know where he was. But they started talking about the war, and the whole party stopped. And it went on the entire evening. So there are people who really want to hear, particularly from people who've been right in the middle of it. And we've got a lot of people here in Atlanta.
Well, we want you to get a list of names and telephone numbers for us, for people that haven't been interviewed here. We're going to try to interview every one of them before it's all over.
Well, I'll be glad to give you the list that I know.
We're going to do it. Thank you again so very much for being with us today.
Absolutely, David.
I don't know how to turn this off, so.
You know what? I found out that one time I called you Mason.
Oh, I started to say
Bless his
something.
heart.
You did.
Well, people call me Mason all the time. That's not the
I know it. He was one of my best friends. When I first got started, he sent me a few patients, which I appreciated a lot. And I worked with him a little bit on consultation and all.
Your mother
And
was
he gave me pretty much an education.
Daddy would have been 104 now.
really?
He was a little older than the two of you.
I fill this thing out. I don't know whether it's exactly full.
Let's let Francis come in and tell us what to do next. Peggy, thank you for coming too.
Well, I
I can't tell you how excited I was to see you
Well, I'm sure.
showing up. Bonus.
Are you going down to Oconee tonight?